We are recording the interview of Steve Christ. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tkach from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. Also in attendance is Mitch Christ. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University at the Veterans and Military Center. It is 4:40 p.m. on April 10th, 2018. Steve, thank you for being with us. Appreciate this. Let's start off with when and where were you born?
I was born in Waukesha, Wisconsin in 1930.
All right. Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My parents were Theodore and Elsie Christ, and my father was a chef. I owned a restaurant, and he was a chef, and my mother was a housemaker.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have. I had an older sister who is deceased. I had an older brother who is deceased, and I have a younger sister that lives in Mount Prospect, Illinois.
Okay. Do you have any other family members that served in the military?
That are in the military?
That served in the military?
I have a grandson. It's a Navy SEAL in the military,
Okay.
and that's the only one I have.
Oh, all right. Wow. Okay. So what year did you join the Air Force?
I graduated from Cole College in 1953, and they had ROTC there, and I received my second lieutenant's commission at graduation in 1953. I applied for flight training, and I was accepted, and I went into the service in August of 1953, and I reported to a civilian Air Force training camp or facility in Kinston, North Carolina.
What led to your decision to join ROTC and the military?
I just was interested in the military portion of it, and ROTC was very well organized on campus, and I elected to join them.
All right.
And like I say, after I received my commission, I elected to apply for pilot training.
Mm-hmm. And what made you want to become a pilot?
I just had that feeling in my gut that I wanted to fly. And there wasn't any relatives or anybody previously that had been involved in flying, and I have never flown before either.
And you've never flown at all before?
At all. And so I applied into the for the Air Force flight training, was accepted, and well, first of all, we went to in New York, where they ran us through a 5-day flight physical, and it was very intensive. They checked everything. So when you pass that, then we were assigned to Kinston, North Carolina, for the first 6 months of our flight training. And of course, there is where they sorted out those that can fly and those that they can't handle it, and they wash them out. So we started out 20 hours in a Piper Cub, and that's where they did a lot of the washing out, you might say. Well, unfortunately for me, a lot of the guys in my class had flown before. Some of them had private pilot's license, and the Piper Cub was a piece of cake for them. Well, there were 3 of us that have never flown, and we were kind of struggling to get caught up with the rest of them. And so they put me up for what they call the check ride. If you don't pass the check ride, that's when you get washed out. And this was after 18 hours. And the person that was in charge of the flight operations there took me up for a check ride. And he said, well, Lieutenant Christ, he says, you do everything mechanical. You don't have that feel. But he says, I don't think it's serious enough to wash you out. He says, we're going to pass you on to the next phase. So he did that with the other 2 fellows also. And then we went into the T6 for the next phase of our training. And so he took us over as our instructor, us three. Well, he had a lot of pride in bringing us along very rapidly. So we were the first three to solo in the T6 out of our whole class. And then from the, we went through training on that. And then we went, after we finished that, then that was the first 6 months. Then I got transferred to San Angelo, Texas for the second 6 months of our flight training.
Is this at San Angelo?
Yes, San Angelo, Texas.
I've been there.
And there we went into training on the T-28. And that was assimilated like a jet aircraft, yet it was propeller driven. So you can decide which way you wanted to go, whether you wanted to go jets or multi-engine. Well, I ended up going multi-engine, so then our training went into the T-25, or the B-25 was our next training facility. So we trained in the B-25 and finished that course, and of course when we finished that is when we got our wings. And after I got my wings in San Angelo, they sent me to Randolph Field in San Antonio. And we had 8 weeks of advanced multi-engine training there. So when we finished that, I got sent to Charleston, South Carolina. And at that time, I didn't know that we would be training for a special mission, but they put us into training on the C-119. And so, actually, we were in training for a year down there in preparation for this project. We had no idea what the project was going to be, but they were sending us through these unusual maneuvers where we would be going off the ground very, very close, maybe 30 feet, and then all of a sudden you'd have to yank the aircraft up. And after we went through and all that maneuvers, we found out later on why we were training to do that. And but that wasn't until later on. But in the meantime, we took our aircraft, we flew out the aircraft up to Hagerstown, Maryland. And that's where they rejuvenated them to make them for this aerial pickup. And they put a big tank in the center for additional gas, because we were able to stay up for 15 hours. And they installed, instead of the normal back doors, which were clamshell, they opened up the other way. Or I mean, they opened up in a clamshell type. So they changed the doors. They installed a cable mechanism that would take the drogue hook, and that's what we would be recovering these balloons that would be coming our way. So when we got ready to started to get ready on that, we took the aircraft to Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado, and they installed the electronics equipment aboard. And what the electronics equipment was, it was a little black box, and it had a telephone dial on it. And what that was for is we could track those balloons when they were in the air, and by what they were sending, you could identify which one it was, and we would have the code. And that's what we would use to bring them down. But about a month before we were going to depart, we were scheduled for Iwo Jima, that we were going to be based on Iwo Jima, our squadron. Well, the hurricane destroyed about 50% of the bases over there. So at the last minute, they changed us to Itazuki Air Force Base in Japan. So we departed, I think it was sometime in October, and we flew our planes to Seattle and gassed up, and then we went to Kodiak, Alaska, and then we flew to Adak, in the Aleutians, and they held us there for 3 days because of winds. And we had to have the proper, more of a tailwind, hopefully, than a headwind because of the long trip. And so they held us there, and then they finally released us, and we flew then to Misawa, Japan. And we ran into quite a problem when we got there. We were running low on gas, and when we called in for Misawa Airport landing instructions, they said, negative, the field is closed. We have a snowstorm. And they gave us an alternate. And we said couldn't have enough fuel to make the alternate. So the aircraft commander declared an emergency. So once you declare an emergency, they have to bring you in. And even though it was snowing very, very hard, of course we couldn't see, and they brought you in by GCA, ground control approach, where they talk you in. And so after we landed, they told us to, after we stopped the plane, cut the engines off. And then they had weapons carriers coming out to pick us up, and also they had a couple of guys that would get up on the wings and with measuring sticks on the gas tanks to see how much fuel you had. If you had enough fuel to have made the alternate base that they were assigning you to, be a court-martial offense. And they figured we had 12 minutes of fuel left, so we did have the emergency. So after that, then things got cleared up, and we flew then down to Itazuki Air Force Base. That was on the southern island of Japan, and that's where we were based. And what was the program or the project that we were on? And this was a SAC-TAC combination mission. It was called the Moby Dick mission, and actually it was under the direction of the State Department because of the consequences that could happen. And basically what they were doing is they were releasing these, they call them weather balloons, in Germany, and they had a couple other locations they were releasing them, but then when they would be get up to about 80,000 feet into the jet stream, and they had a camera aboard. It was about a 5-foot square box attached to the balloon, and that had a camera on it that were taking pictures, and they were photographing Russia is what they were doing. So when they got over into close enough a vicinity for us, and by the way, we had to stay when we alternated each crew, but the crew, there had to be one crew stationed right on the airfield in tents next to the plane, so once they found one coming in right, you had to scramble right now, get out there and start tracking it. We always would attempt to cut it down over water. Well, what would happen then, we would get the signals coming from the balloon, and we knew which one it was then. So then when it got in the right position, we had the code number to dial. So then what would happen is the balloon would burst, and this would start dropping. And at about 35,000 feet, the chutes would open up. And they had the big main chute, and on top of that, they have what they call a drogue chute. And that's what you would try to snag with your drogue hook, was that drogue chute. So when it got down to about 20,000 or 18,000, that's when we would try to go after it. And you sometimes would have to make several passes. And of course, it's very, very difficult because that thing's bouncing around like this. So your timing of a hook back here and where your plane is going has got to be very, very good. And and if you did have the good fortune of snagging one, then you had a crew in the back to wheel it in. And if we did get one, then we have to fly it directly to Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And there they would meet us with a weapons carrier, load it on the weapons carrier, put it on another aircraft, and fly it direct to SAC headquarters in Omaha.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this, we were there 6 months when carrying on this mission. And of course, a lot of times you got scrambled, and something maybe mechanically or electronically didn't operate with it, or the winds took it way off, or you couldn't cut it down, or you couldn't track it. So there were very few that were actually recovered.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did cut the drogue chute and it hit the water, then the salt water would activate 2 cylinders,
Mm-hmm.
and there would be a cable that would be between those cylinders. That's what our practice in all of this was
Okay.
doing. So then you would time it to try to get the hook to grab that cable,
Mm-hmm.
and then lift it up. And the reason why you had to lift it up is you got to yank it out of the
Mhm.
water, because if you kept going, that would just drag the plane down. So we never did do a water recovery,
Mm-hmm.
but because one, evidently the cylinders malfunction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard to spot that little, well, it's 5 foot, but it looks like a little tiny speck when you're in the air. And the waves were 20 foot high, bouncing around. So we would go and drop as close as we could sea marker dye.
Mm-hmm.
So it would, be spotted. And then we would stay there circling that and contact the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And they would try to get somebody out there to pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they couldn't get out there fast enough, and we're getting low on gas, so we would give them the coordinates of where we think it was, and it had the sea marker dye there. But then we'd have to head back and hope that the Navy would get it picked up.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, this went on, like I say, for 6 months, and we ended up our project in, let's see, I guess it was in March. And then we were going to fold things up and return.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have been set to either stay in or be discharged.
Mm-hmm.
I had to make that decision. And well, Mitch was born while I was overseas, because my wife was 7 months pregnant when we went overseas. So I didn't see him until he was 5 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that no, I didn't want any part of staying with the service and bouncing around and different things. So I elected to get out.
Mm-hmm.
But so that was pretty much the end of my military service. But it was quite a project that we were on.
Definitely, yes.
And enjoyed it very much.
Mm-hmm. How many of these cameras did you recover during those 6 months?
Well, we got 2 of them, and I think the other Captain Mims got 3 of them. And I really think that, I don't know what the other squadrons picked up, but I think in all, even though there were many, many released,
Mm-hmm.
I think there was only like 10 or 12 that
Mm-hmm.
were recovered.
Did some of them fall on land?
Yes. And what they did is they had signs on them in different languages.
Mm-hmm.
If they would return them, for a reward.
Mm-hmm.
And they did get some back that way.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, would malfunction or continue flying until the balloon would finally just blow up. And I don't know what happened to all of them that they were launching.
Mm-hmm. Did the Soviets get their hands on some of them?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
No.
And I'm sure they did.
Mm-hmm. And then, did this project go on after you left, or did it just?
No. That was the end of it.
That was it.
I think the Russians knew then what was happening. They probably got their hands on one with the cameras, and so no, they did not continue that. And I think the next phase, because that aircraft that's over there in the Air Force Museum, 037, was then, I think, remodified again, and it had long arms that would come out instead of cables, it looked like. And that's where they were discovering or recovering from satellites.
Satellites, yeah.
Photograph and film, according to what I read over there. And so as far as the project with the balloon and the cameras that I was involved in, I think that was the end of it. And then the next phase, when they went to the satellite thing, that was later. They were talking like 1960 for that. So, and I'm not familiar with how that, anything about that program.
Did you continue to fly after you left?
No, well, that was kind of interesting. When I returned, my brother-in-law was visiting him, and he said, "Boy, the guy next door got a plane out here at the airport. He wants to take you up." I says, "Fine, let's go." So that was a small Piper Cup. So we went up, and he says, "Well, you want to take it in for a landing?" And I said, "Sure." So I took over on that, and I turned on the final, and I pulled the power off. You just sit there and kept flying and flying and flying. I'm used to when you pull the power off, you start descending. And no, I other than that, I did not do any flying. I was going to sign up in the reserves so I could fly. So I did talk to the Air Force people there in Cedar Rapids, and oh yes, we're glad to have you join us, and we can fly once a month. I said, "Well, gee, that sounds great." I says, "Do we fly out of the Eastern Iowa Airport out here?" "No, we have to go to Chicago once a month to fly out of there." I decided, no, I'm not going to do that. So I did not fly after that.
So what did you end up doing after the service?
Well, after that, I went to took a temporary job with this company called Cherry Burrow, and my friend that was working there told me about it, so I went in for an interview. He said they're for a time study training, and this was an industrial plant. And I says, "What's time study?" And I had no idea. So basically, they offered me the job, and I thought, well, I'm really not interested, but I think that I better take it because I got to start buying groceries and decide what I want to do. So I did take the job and got trained in time study, and this was where you actually, like machinists or welders or whatever, you timing and motion study and all, and you set a rate, because at that time they had rates. And then through the years, I kept changing jobs, getting more responsibility, and I ended up as Senior Vice President of Operations of the whole operation. And after 40 years, I retired. So that was pretty much my lifespan. And like I say, as far as anything to do with the Air Force and that, it was pretty well, when I retired got discharged from the Air Force, that was about it.
Are you involved in any veterans organizations?
No, I'm not.
So your grandson, he's in the Navy.
Yes.
I'm sure there's not much probably talk about with that, but what's your feelings about your grandson being in the Navy and the climate of the military these days?
Well, of course, it's a concern at this time, and he just spent 6 months in Iraq, and he just returned several weeks ago. And of course, he he's a graduate of the Naval Academy,
Mm-hmm.
and then he went through SEALs training, became a Navy SEAL, which was something unreal to go through that training. And so then he got additional training, and he was a troop commander of a troop. I think 23 guys that were in a platoon, and 23. And he was in charge of them when they went overseas to Iraq, and he was over there for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I'm concerned about what's happening in the world and what he is doing. Now he has returned, and now they're promoting him to the next level. And instead of being in charge of one platoon, he's going to be in charge of 3.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to have more responsibilities, and with what the world climate is going on today and the turmoil, I'm always concerned about that.
Mm-hmm. Is there any life lessons that you learned while serving in the Air Force that helped out later on in life?
Yes, of course, when you're flying, you get into a lot of situations, you might say, that are could result in death, and there are tough decisions go on there, and you can't let that bother you. And most of the pilots learn the fact that you accept the silver bullet effect.
Mm-hmm.
When it's your time, it's going to be your time, whether you're in the bathtub, or whether you're crossing the street, or whether you're flying a plane.
Mm-hmm.
There's you're destined for that time. So you just accept that. And I've accepted that throughout my life, that kind of a attitude, that you just can't let things be concerning to you, and take life a day at a time. And if your time is come, that's it.
Mm-hmm. For future generations that might be viewing this interview, is there any message you'd like to leave for those people?
Well, yes. You mean just in the interview?
Yeah, or just
Well, of course, anybody that's going to be getting involved, whether it's military training or job training or whatever, is to try to do the best they can, and as far as the loyalty that is required, that you should have for your country, because there's so many plus things that, because you're able to live in the United States, that you should be thankful for.
All right. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to discuss?
No, not really. Like I say, I really haven't been in touch with any of the crew, because there was an 11-man crew that we had aboard, and they all went different directions. Because when my crew, the pilots returning, they already knew that they were going to be going into the C-130. That was the next thing they were going to be training for, was the C-130. And but that was about it.
And then after seeing the Air Force Museum today, what's your thoughts on that?
I am so impressed with. I can't believe the number of different aircraft and how they were used and the number produced. I can see why it takes trillions supporting the military, because well, I'll tell you, it's very impressive, and the size of some of these. You wonder how they even get off the ground, but they very impressive.
Seeing the C-119 today, did that bring back any memories? Or I'm sure it did, but did it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. Made me think of the people that I flew with and the crew, and they did have the back of it open, so I was able to see the back. Unfortunately, even though we had talked to a gal there, Mitch talked to somebody there, and they sent a girl down that took us to the C-119. So we kind of had a little personal attention to get to the C-119 right away. Asked if there was any way that I could see the cockpit, get in the cockpit, and unfortunately that was a no-no. They wouldn't allow that.
Yeah. But I'm sure it was a cool experience. Well, there's nothing else. Yeah, we'll conclude the interview.
Okay.
All right. Well, that concludes the interview of Steve Christ. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.